Hi, I'm Victoria Hayes, and I thought loyalty to family meant everything. I thought building bridges meant staying silent when they burned me. I thought being the good daughter meant accepting their version of who I was supposed to be. Instead, on a rainy Tuesday morning in Portland, I discovered my parents had called my boss to tell him I was mentally unstable and needed immediate intervention. They wanted me fired, discredited, destroyed. What they didn't know was that their mother's will had just made me the majority shareholder of their precious company. The look on their faces when I walked into that boardroom wasn't just shock. It was the exact moment they realized they'd been playing chess while I held all the pieces. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Pearl District loft as I stared at the email that would change everything. Daniel Morrison, my boss at North Point Technologies, had sent it at 11:30 the night before, and I'd been too exhausted from debugging code to check my messages until this gray October morning. The subject line was simple enough. Urgent meeting, 9 a.m. sharp. But something about the tone, the lack of his usual casual greeting, made my stomach clench with an unnameable dread. I pulled my robe tighter around my shoulders and padded barefoot to the kitchen, the hardwood floors cold beneath my feet. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with its familiar rhythm while I tried to shake off the anxiety that had settled like fog in my chest. Outside, Portland was waking up slowly, the usual morning commuters hurrying past with umbrellas and steaming cups, their faces hidden beneath hoods and scarves. The loft had been my sanctuary for 3 years now, ever since I'd finally saved enough to move out of the cramped studio apartment I'd been renting since college. Every piece of furniture, every carefully chosen decoration, represented a small victory of independence. The exposed brick walls held my collection of vintage tech posters, and the corner desk where I worked on personal coding projects was positioned perfectly to catch the morning light. This space was mine in a way nothing had ever been before. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from Lily Chen, my closest friend since our computer science program at Portland State. Coffee before your mysterious meeting? Blue moon in 20? I smiled despite my nerves. Lily had an uncanny ability to sense when I needed support, even when I hadn't said anything was wrong. 20 minutes later, I found myself in the familiar warmth of Blue Moon Cafe, nursing a lavender latte while Lily studied my face with the intensity of someone debugging particularly stubborn code. Her dark hair was pulled back in its usual efficient ponytail, and she wore the kind of practical sweater that somehow looked effortlessly stylish on her petite frame. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed, wrapping her hands around her own mug. "And you've got that crease between your eyebrows that only shows up when you're really worried about something." I sighed, pulling up the email on my phone and sliding it across the small wooden table. "Daniel wants to see me first thing this morning. No context, no explanation. Just, urgent meeting." I paused, watching her read. "It's probably nothing, but something feels off. He's never been this formal with me before." Lily frowned, handing the phone back. "When's the last time you talked to your parents?" The question caught me off guard, though I shouldn't have been surprised. Lily knew my family dynamics better than anyone, had witnessed firsthand the subtle ways Richard and Catherine Hayes could undermine my confidence while maintaining their facade of concerned parents. 2 weeks ago," I said slowly. "Why?" "Just wondering." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "You know how they get when they feel like you're moving too far out of their sphere of influence. The promotion, this apartment, your independence. It threatens their narrative about who you're supposed to be." I wanted to dismiss her concern, but Lily had a point. My parents had never been particularly supportive of my career in tech, preferring to focus their attention on my younger brother Marcus and his role in the family investment firm, Hayes & Associates. They'd built their lives around old Portland money, country club memberships, and maintaining appearances in circles where women like me were expected to marry well rather than code well. The walk to North Point Technologies took me through the heart of downtown Portland, past the food trucks already setting up for lunch, and the early commuters clutching their phones like lifelines. The October air carried the scent of rain and fallen leaves, that particular Pacific Northwest combination that usually calmed my nerves. Today, it felt heavy with possibility, and dread in equal measure. North Point occupied 3 floors of a sleek glass building overlooking the Willamette River. I'd been working there for 4 years, climbing from junior developer to senior software engineer through a combination of skill, dedication, and the kind of quiet persistence that had served me well throughout my life. The company specialized in developing custom software solutions for healthcare systems, and I'd found genuine satisfaction in creating tools that help doctors and nurses do their jobs more effectively. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt longer than usual, each floor ding echoing in the enclosed space. I checked my reflection in the polished steel doors. Navy blazer, dark jeans, minimal makeup. Professional but not trying too hard. My shoulder-length brown hair was pulled back in a low bun, a few strands escaping to frame my face. I looked competent, composed, nothing like someone who needed urgent intervention. Daniel's office was at the corner of the floor, with windows facing both the river and the city center. He was already there when I knocked, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by something I couldn't quite read. At 45, Daniel had the kind of relaxed authority that came from years of successfully managing both code and people. His graying beard was neatly trimmed, and his flannel shirt was unbuttoned over a vintage band t-shirt, the uniform of Portland tech leaders who wanted to maintain their alternative credibility while running serious businesses. "Victoria, come in. Close the door behind you." His voice was carefully neutral, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. In 4 years of working together, Daniel had never been anything but warm and direct with me. I settled into the chair across from his desk, trying to read the papers scattered across its surface. "You said it was urgent. Is everything okay with the Morrison Health project?" The question came out steadier than I felt. Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Victoria, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you struggling with anything right now? Personally, I mean. Mental health, family stress, anything that might be affecting your judgment or decision-making?" The question hit me like ice water. "I'm sorry, what?" I blinked at him, genuinely confused. "Daniel, where is this coming from?" He picked up a yellow legal pad from his desk, scanning what appeared to be handwritten notes. "I received a very concerning phone call yesterday afternoon. From your parents, actually. They expressed some serious worries about your mental state, said you'd been exhibiting erratic behavior, making poor decisions, possibly having some kind of breakdown." The world seemed to tilt sideways. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. "My parents called you?" My voice sounded far away, as if someone else was speaking. "They called my boss to discuss my mental health?" "They were very convincing, Victoria. Very concerned. They mentioned specific incidents, missed family dinners, strange texts, isolating yourself from people who care about you." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but his voice remained professional. "They suggested that perhaps you needed some time off, maybe some professional help. They even offered to help arrange private treatment." I stared at him in disbelief. "Daniel, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not having a mental breakdown. I haven't missed family dinners. I've chosen not to attend some because they consistently make me feel terrible about myself. I haven't sent strange texts. I've been setting boundaries about what I will and won't discuss with them. And I'm not isolating myself. I'm building a life that doesn't revolve around their approval." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic far below. Daniel's computer screen cast a blue glow across the papers on his desk, and I could see my own reflection multiplied in the windows behind him. Dozens of Victorias all sitting very still, all trying to understand how her parents had just tried to destroy her career. "They were very specific," Daniel said finally. "They mentioned your grandmother's death last month, said you'd been acting strangely since the funeral, taking risks, making impulsive decisions, cutting off communication with family members who were just trying to help. My grandmother. Eleanor Hayes had died 6 weeks ago, and yes, it had affected me deeply. She'd been the one person in my family who truly understood me, who supported my independence and my career choices. But I certainly hadn't been acting erratically. If anything, losing her had made me more determined to live according to the values she'd instilled in me: integrity, self-reliance, and refusing to let others diminish my worth. "Daniel," I said carefully, "my grandmother's death was difficult for me, but it hasn't impaired my ability to do my job. If you look at my work over the past 6 weeks, you'll find it's been consistently high quality. I've met every deadline, exceeded every expectation, and collaborated effectively with my team. These concerns my parents have expressed, they're not about my mental health. They're about control." I watched his face as he processed this, saw the moment when doubt began to creep in. Daniel was a good manager, precisely because he paid attention to his employees, actual performance rather than outside noise. And my performance had been stellar. "Tell me more about that," he said, setting down the legal pad. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. My parents have very specific ideas about who I should be and how I should live my life. They wanted me to work in the family business, marry someone from their social circle, have children, and generally follow a script they wrote for me. When I chose a different path, it threatened their narrative.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
They've spent years trying to undermine my confidence and my independence in subtle ways. This phone call, it's not subtle. Daniel nodded slowly. They did mention the family business. Said you'd been offered opportunities there that you'd irrationally rejected. I was offered a job answering phones and filing papers while my brother was handed a senior position despite having fewer qualifications and less experience than me. When I declined, they characterized it as rebellion and poor judgment. I leaned forward slightly. "Daniel, in 4 years of working here, have I ever given you reason to question my mental stability or professional competence?" "No," he admitted, "you haven't. In fact, you're one of my most reliable team members." Which is why this call was so unsettling. I felt some of the tension in my shoulders release. "What exactly did they say they wanted you to do?" Daniel glanced at his notes again. They asked if I'd noticed any concerning behaviors. When I said I hadn't, they suggested that perhaps I should keep a closer eye on you, maybe consider requiring you to take some time off for treatment. They were very persuasive, Victoria. Very concerned about what might happen if you weren't getting the help you needed. The calculated nature of their approach was becoming clear. They'd called my boss, expressed concern rather than making accusations, offered solutions, positioned themselves as loving parents dealing with a troubled child. It was masterful manipulation, the kind of subtle sabotage they'd perfected over years of managing their social and business relationships. "They want me to fail," I said quietly. "They want me discredited and dependent, so I'll have no choice but to come back to them and accept whatever role they've decided I should play." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, studying me. Outside, the rain had intensified, streams of water running down the windows and distorting the view of the city below. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "I want you to judge me based on my work, not on phone calls from people who have their own agenda. I want to continue doing my job well, which I have been doing and will continue to do. And I want you to document this conversation, because something tells me this isn't going to be the end of their attempts to interfere with my life." He nodded, making a note on the legal pad. "For what it's worth, Victoria, I'm sorry this happened. It was inappropriate for them to contact me directly, and I should have shut down the conversation sooner. I was caught off guard, but that's not an excuse." "Thank you," I said, standing to leave. "And Daniel? If they call again, please don't take the call. Refer them to HR if they have concerns about my performance, and make sure any such concerns are documented and shared with me immediately." As I walked back to my desk, past the familiar chaos of keyboards clacking and coffee brewing, I felt a strange combination of fury and clarity. My parents had just shown me exactly who they were and exactly how far they were willing to go to maintain control over my life. They'd tried to convince my boss I was mentally unstable, hoping to plant seeds of doubt that would eventually bloom into professional consequences. But they'd also made a crucial mistake. They'd underestimated both my relationship with my manager and my own ability to articulate what was really happening. Instead of destroying my credibility, They'd revealed their true nature to someone who was now documenting their interference. I settled at my desk and opened my laptop, pulling up the Morrison Health project files I'd been working on the day before. The familiar lines of code were soothing, logical, predictable in a way human relationships never seemed to be. Each function had a purpose, each variable had a defined role, and when something went wrong, you could trace it back to its source and fix it. As I worked, I found my mind drifting to my grandmother Eleanor, who died just 6 weeks ago at the age of 87. She'd been the family maverick, the one who'd supported my education and career choices even when the rest of the family expressed disapproval. Eleanor had started her own business, in an era when women rarely did such things, building a small empire through intelligence, determination, and an absolute refusal to let others define her worth. During her final weeks in the hospital, she'd pulled me aside during one of my daily visits. Her voice had been weak, but her eyes were as sharp as ever when she said, "Victoria, I need you to promise me something. Don't let them make you smaller than you are. You have more strength than you know, and when the time comes, you'll know exactly what to do with it." At the time, I'd assumed she was simply encouraging me to stay true to myself. Now I wondered if she'd known something I didn't, if she'd seen the storm coming and wanted to make sure I was prepared for it. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "How did the meeting go? Everything okay?" I quickly typed back, "We'll call you later. It's complicated, but I'm fine." The last thing I needed was to worry her while I was still processing what had happened myself. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of focused work. I lost myself in the clean logic of code, the satisfaction of solving problems that had clear solutions. But beneath the surface, I could feel something shifting, crystallizing. My parents had just declared war in the most calculated way possible, and I needed to decide how to respond. By lunchtime, I'd made my decision. I walked to Blue Moon Cafe, ordered my usual sandwich, and called the one person who'd always understood the dynamics of my family better than anyone else. "Mr. Cross?" I said when the familiar voice answered. "This is Victoria Hayes. I think it's time we talked about my grandmother's will." Benjamin Cross had been Eleanor's lawyer for over 30 years, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who'd helped her navigate the complexities of building and maintaining her business empire. He'd also been a family friend, someone who'd watched me grow up and witnessed firsthand the subtle ways my parents had tried to manage and control my path through life. "Victoria," his voice warmed immediately, "I was wondering when you'd call. Your grandmother left very specific instructions about when certain information should be shared with you. I believe recent events may have triggered those conditions." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What kind of information?" "The kind that your parents have been hoping you'd never learn about. Can you come to my office this afternoon? There are some documents you need to see and some decisions you need to make." As I walked through downtown Portland toward Benjamin Cross's law office, the city felt different somehow, charged with possibility and change. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets gleaming and the air crisp with the promise of autumn. I passed business people hurrying to lunch meetings, artists setting up displays in Pioneer Square, tourists consulting maps and guidebooks. Everything looked the same as it had that morning, but I felt fundamentally altered by the conversation with Daniel and the phone call with Mr. Cross. My parents had tried to destroy my professional reputation, but in doing so, they'd forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for years. They didn't see me as a competent adult deserving of respect. They saw me as a problem to be managed, a variable to be controlled. The Cross & Associates building was an elegant old brownstone in the heart of the legal district, the kind of place where important decisions had been made for generations. Mr. Cross's office was on the 3rd floor, all dark wood and leather-bound books, with windows overlooking the tree-lined street below. He greeted me with the same gentle smile I remembered from childhood, though his hair had gone completely silver since I'd seen him last. "Victoria, you look well. Your grandmother would be proud of how you've handled yourself these past years." "Thank you," I said, settling into the chair across from his mahogany desk. "She always spoke highly of you, too. She said you were the only lawyer she trusted to understand both the letter and spirit of what she wanted." He chuckled, pulling a thick manila folder from his desk drawer. "Eleanor was a remarkable woman. brilliant, determined, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting the people she loved. Which brings us to why you're here. He opened the folder, revealing a stack of legal documents that looked both official and somehow ominous. What do you know about your grandmother's business interests, Victoria? The real extent of them, I mean. I frowned, trying to remember the conversations I'd had with Eleanor over the years. I know she started Hayes & Associates back in the 1960s, built it from nothing into a successful investment consulting firm. I know she handed day-to-day operations over to my father about 15 years ago, though she maintained ownership until her death. That's correct, as far as it goes. What you may not know is that Eleanor never transferred ownership to your father. She maintained controlling interest in the company until the day she died, and she was very specific about what should happen to those shares. He pulled out a document that looked like a will, though it was far more complex than anything I'd ever seen. According to the Eleanor Hayes Memorial Trust, 60% of Hayes & Associates, the controlling interest, now belongs to you. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. I'm sorry, what? Your grandmother left you controlling interest in the family business. She also left specific instructions about when this information should be revealed to you and when you should be granted access to your inheritance. He leaned back in his chair, studying my reaction. She predicted that your parents would eventually attempt to undermine your independence in some significant way. She wanted you to have options when that happened. The room seemed to spin slightly as I processed this information. How long have you known about this? Since she updated her will 3 years ago. Eleanor was very specific about the conditions that would trigger the release of this information. She wanted you to be financially stable and professionally established before you learned about your inheritance. She also wanted to ensure that you'd experienced your parents' true nature without the complicating factor of family money. I thought about this morning's meeting with Daniel, about my parents' calculated attempt to destroy my career. She knew they'd try something like this. She suspected they might. Your grandmother loved your parents, but she had no illusions about their character. She watched them manage you throughout your childhood and young adulthood, and she recognized patterns that concerned her deeply. He handed me another document. This is a letter she wrote to you. She asked me to give it to you when the trust conditions were met. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope, recognizing Eleanor's distinctive handwriting immediately. My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, it means that your parents have finally shown you who they truly are. I'm sorry it took such a painful revelation, but I knew that you needed to understand their nature completely before you could make the choices I'm now empowering you to make. Hayes & Associates was my life's work, built from nothing through determination, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to let others define my worth. I'm leaving it to you because you embody those same qualities, and because I trust you to protect what I've built while making it something even greater. Your parents have spent years trying to convince you that you're not capable of making important decisions, that you need their guidance and approval to navigate the world. They've done this not out of love, but out of fear. Fear that if you truly understood your own worth and capabilities, you'd no longer accept their version of who you should be. The trust gives you several options. You can take control of the company immediately, you can sell your shares, or you can maintain silent ownership while continuing to pursue your own path. Whatever you choose, choose it for yourself, not for them or anyone else. Remember what I always told you. You have more strength than you know. Trust that strength, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you smaller than you are. With all my love and confidence in your future, Grandmother Eleanor. I read the letter twice, tears blurring the careful script. Eleanor had seen all of this coming. The manipulation, the attempts at control, the eventual escalation to outright sabotage. She'd planned for it, prepared for it, and given me the tools to respond in ways my parents would never expect. What exactly does controlling interest mean? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. It means you can make any major decisions about the company's direction, leadership, and operations. You can hire and fire senior management, approve or reject significant investments, and determine the company's strategic focus. He paused, letting this sink in. It also means your parents answer to you now, not the other way around. I thought about Richard Hayes, who'd spent years dismissing my career choices and treating me like a child incapable of making important decisions. I thought about Catherine, who'd perfected the art of undermining my confidence while maintaining plausible deniability. I thought about Marcus, who'd been handed opportunities I'd never been offered while I was building my expertise in an entirely different field. They'd tried to destroy my career this morning, confident that I had no recourse, no power to fight back. They had no idea that their own mother had just handed me the keys to everything they thought they controlled. "When do I officially take control?" I asked. "The moment you sign these papers. The trust becomes active immediately, and the board of directors will be notified of the ownership change within 48 hours. He pulled out a pen, offering it to me. "The next board meeting is scheduled for Friday morning. Your parents are expecting to present their quarterly projections and strategic plans for the coming year. They have no idea you'll be walking into that room as their new boss." I took the pen, feeling its weight in my hand. This was it. The moment when I stopped being my parents' victim and became something they'd never prepared for. Eleanor had given me the power to respond to their betrayal in the most poetic way possible. I signed my name carefully at the bottom of each document, watching as my signature transformed me from Victoria Hayes, the wayward daughter, into Victoria Hayes, controlling shareholder of Hayes & Associates. "There's one more thing," Mr. Cross said as I finished signing. "Your grandmother also established a substantial cash inheritance for you, separate from the business interests. Enough to ensure that whatever decisions you make about the company, you're making them freely, without financial pressure." By the time I left his office, the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting long golden shadows across the wet streets. I walked slowly back toward my apartment, needing time to process everything that had changed in the span of a few hours. This morning I'd been a software engineer whose parents had just tried to sabotage her career. Tonight I was the majority owner of a multi-million-dollar investment firm, with the power to reshape not just my own future but the futures of everyone who'd underestimated me. I pulled out my phone and called Lily, knowing I needed to share this with someone before the weight of it overwhelmed me entirely. "Victoria, I've been worried about you all day. How did the meeting with Daniel go?" "Lily," I said, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk as the full magnitude of my situation hit me. "Can you meet me at my apartment? There's something I need to tell you, and you're not going to believe it." As I walked the final blocks home, I thought about the board meeting on Friday, about the moment when Richard and Catherine Hayes would realize that their carefully constructed world had just shifted on its axis. They'd tried to paint me as mentally unstable, incapable of making sound decisions, dependent on their guidance and support. In 3 days, I'd be sitting at the head of their conference table, and they'd finally understand exactly what kind of woman Eleanor Hayes had raised me to be. Lily arrived at my apartment 30 minutes later, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the expression of someone preparing for either celebration or crisis intervention. She took one look at my face and immediately went to the kitchen, emerging with 2 glasses and a corkscrew. "Okay," she said, settling onto my couch and pouring generous portions of red wine. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out. You sounded like you'd either won the lottery or discovered aliens on the phone." I curled up in the armchair across from her, cradling my wine glass like a lifeline. The familiar comfort of my living room felt surreal after everything that had happened. The exposed brick walls, the carefully chosen furniture, the view of the Pearl District below, everything looked the same, but I felt like a completely different person than the woman who'd woken up here this morning. "My parents called Daniel," I began, watching Lily's eyebrows shoot up. "They told him I was mentally unstable and needed professional intervention. They suggested he keep a close eye on me, maybe require me to take time off for treatment." Lily's wineglass stopped halfway to her lips. "They what?" I walked her through the entire conversation with Daniel, watching her expression shift from disbelief to fury to something approaching professional fascination. Lily had always been able to analyze problems with the same systematic approach she brought to debugging code, and I could see her mind working through the implications. "That's not just manipulation," she said when I finished. "That's character assassination." They were trying to plant seeds of doubt that would grow into career consequences down the line. Even if Daniel didn't act on their suggestions immediately, he'd be watching for signs, questioning your judgment, second-guessing decisions he'd normally trust you to make. That's exactly what I thought. But that's not even the most unbelievable part. I took a steadying sip of wine. Lily, my grandmother left me controlling interest in Hayes and Associates, 60% of the company. I'm now my parents' boss. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the traffic 15 floors below and the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Lily set down her wine glass very carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter the reality we were both trying to process. "Victoria," she said slowly, "are you telling me that on the same day your parents tried to destroy your career, you inherited the power to destroy theirs?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you." Lily leaned back against the couch cushions, running her hands through her dark hair. Okay, this is... She paused, searching for words. "This is like something out of a revenge fantasy novel. Your grandmother planned this?" I pulled Eleanor's letter from my purse and handed it to her. Watching Lily read it was like watching someone witness magic. Her expression shifted from skepticism to amazement to something approaching awe. "She knew," Lily said finally. "She absolutely knew they'd eventually cross a line, and she prepared for it. Victoria, this is brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant." The board meeting is Friday morning. They have no idea I'm coming, no idea what's changed. They're planning to present their quarterly projections and strategic plans, thinking they're still in control of everything. Lily was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "What are you going to do?" The question I'd been avoiding all afternoon hung between us like a challenge. I could feel the weight of possibility pressing against my chest, the magnitude of choices I'd never imagined having to make. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to walk into that boardroom and watch their faces when they realize what's happened. Part of me wants to fire them immediately and take over the company. And part of me just wants to sell my shares and walk away from all of it." "Those aren't mutually exclusive options," Lily pointed out. "You could walk in, let them know you're in charge, evaluate how they respond, and then decide whether they deserve to keep their positions." I considered this, swirling the wine in my glass and watching the deep red liquid catch the lamplight. Eleanor's letter said I have more strength than I know. I keep thinking about what she meant by that. Maybe she meant you're strong enough to use this power responsibly instead of just wielding it like a weapon. Though honestly, after what they did today, a little weaponizing might be justified. We talked until nearly midnight, exploring scenarios and possibilities, weighing options and consequences. Lily had always been my sounding board for major decisions, but this felt different, more consequential, more permanent. Whatever I chose to do with this inheritance would reshape not just my relationship with my parents, but my entire future. As she was leaving, Lily paused at the door and turned back to me. "You know what strikes me most about all this? Your parents spent years convincing you that you needed their approval, their guidance, their version of who you should be. But Eleanor saw something in you that they either couldn't see or chose to ignore. She trusted you with everything she'd built because she knew you'd know what to do with it." After Lily left, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat by the window, looking out at Portland's nighttime skyline. The city stretched out below me in a grid of lights and shadows, millions of people living their lives, making their choices, dealing with their own family dramas and professional challenges. I thought about my grandmother, about the woman who'd built Hayes and Associates from nothing, in an era when female entrepreneurs faced obstacles I could barely imagine. She'd been in her 30s when she started the company, not much older than I was now. She'd had no family money to fall back on, no safety net, just intelligence and determination, and an absolute refusal to let others define her worth. Eleanor had always encouraged my independence, but I'd never fully understood why until now. She'd seen the same patterns in my parents that had driven her to leave home at 18 and build her own life on her own terms. She'd watched them try to control and diminish me, and she'd quietly prepared to give me the tools to fight back when the time came. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Victoria, this is Marcus. Mom and Dad are really worried about you. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. My brother had never reached out to me independently before. This was clearly a coordinated effort to continue the manipulation through a different channel. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching Hayes & Associates more thoroughly than I ever had before. I knew the basic outline of the company's history and current operations, but I'd never paid close attention to the financial details or strategic direction. If I was going to walk into that boardroom on Friday, I needed to understand exactly what I was inheriting. The company's website was polished but generic, full of corporate speak about innovative investment strategies and personalized client service. Quote, the leadership page featured photos of Richard as CEO, Catherine as VP of Client Relations, and Marcus as Director of Business Development. All three looked confident and successful, projecting the kind of old money stability that attracted wealthy Portland families seeking investment guidance. But as I dug deeper into public financial records and industry reports, a different picture began to emerge. Hayes & Associates had been losing clients steadily for the past 3 years. Their investment returns were consistently below industry averages. They'd had to let go of several junior staff members and had been passed over for several high-profile client acquisitions. The company Eleanor had built was slowly dying under my parents' management, and they'd been covering up the decline with creative accounting and increasingly desperate marketing efforts. No wonder they'd been so concerned about my independence. They needed someone to blame for their failures, and they'd been grooming me to be that scapegoat. I spent hours that night reading through financial reports, industry analyses, and client testimonials. By the time I finally went to bed, I had a much clearer picture of what Friday's board meeting would really be about. My parents weren't just presenting quarterly projections. They were trying to convince the board to approve increasingly risky investment strategies to compensate for their poor performance. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical October weather that matched my mood perfectly. I called in sick to North Point, knowing I needed the day to prepare for what was coming. I'd never missed work for anything less than genuine illness before, but this felt like the kind of day that justified bending my usual rules. I started with a trip to Benjamin Cross's office to review more of the trust documents and understand exactly what powers my new position granted me. He walked me through the corporate structure, the board composition, and the specific mechanisms by which I could exercise control over company decisions. The beautiful thing about how Eleanor structured this, he explained, is that you have complete authority but also complete flexibility. You can be as hands-on or hands-off as you choose. You can replace the entire management team, or you can maintain the current structure with yourself as silent majority owner. What would you recommend? I asked. He smiled, the same gentle expression I remembered from childhood. I'd recommend you trust your grandmother's judgment. She knew you better than anyone, and she believed you'd know exactly what to do when the time came. From his office, I drove to a boutique downtown and bought myself a new outfit for tomorrow's meeting, a sharp charcoal gray suit that projected authority without being ostentatious, paired with a silk blouse and deep emerald that brought out my eyes. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in that boardroom, someone who couldn't be dismissed or undermined. The shopping trip felt symbolic, like putting on armor for battle. I'd spent years dressing to blend in, to avoid drawing attention or challenging expectations. Tomorrow, I wanted my parents to see immediately that something fundamental had changed. That afternoon, I met with a private investigator Lily had recommended, someone who specialized in corporate intelligence and background research. I wanted to understand not just Hayes & Associates, public face, but the reality behind the polished marketing materials. Your timing is interesting. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Morrison, told me over coffee at a downtown hotel. I've been tracking several investment firms in the Portland market, and Hayes & Associates has been showing some concerning patterns. She pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of charts and graphs that painted an even grimmer picture than my own research had revealed. Client retention was down 30% over 2 years. Several former employees had filed complaints with industry regulators about unethical practices. There were rumors of internal conflicts and questionable investment decisions. The company's reputation in professional circles is deteriorating, Patricia said diplomatically. They're maintaining their client base primarily through personal relationships and family connections. But that's not a sustainable long-term strategy. What would it take to turn things around? I asked. New leadership, definitely. A complete strategic overhaul. Probably some staff changes and a significant marketing push to rebuild credibility. She paused, studying my expression. It's not impossible, but it would require someone with both the authority and the knowledge to make difficult decisions quickly. As I drove home that evening, I felt the last pieces of my decision clicking into place. My parents hadn't just tried to sabotage my career. They'd been actively destroying Eleanor's legacy through incompetence and poor judgment. The company she'd spent decades building was slowly crumbling under their management, and they'd been too proud or too delusional to acknowledge the reality. Eleanor had trusted me with her life's work not just because she loved me, but because she knew I had the skills and integrity to restore what had been lost. She'd seen something in me that I was only beginning to recognize in myself. The ability to lead, to make difficult decisions, to build something meaningful, rather than just protecting what already existed. That night, I called Lily and asked her to come over again. When she arrived, I was sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by financial reports, legal documents, and strategic plans I'd been sketching out. I know what I'm going to do, I told her without preamble. Okay, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Tell me. I'm going to walk into that meeting tomorrow and take control of the company, not as revenge against my parents, but because it's the right thing to do. The company is failing under their leadership, and Eleanor trusted me to fix it. Lily nodded slowly. That's a big decision, Victoria. Are you sure you're ready for everything that comes with it? I'm sure I'm ready to try. I have the business education, I have the strategic thinking skills, and I have something my parents never had. The desire to actually honor what Eleanor built, rather than just profiting from it. We spent the rest of the evening role-playing different scenarios for tomorrow's meeting, anticipating my parents' reactions and planning my responses. Lily, with her gift for logical analysis, helped me think through potential challenges and develop contingency plans. The key thing to remember, she said as we finished up, is that you have all the power in this situation. They can't fire you, they can't override your decisions, and they can't manipulate you the way they used to. The worst they can do is quit. And honestly, that might be the best outcome for everyone. Friday morning arrived crisp and clear, one of those perfect Portland autumn days when the air smells like coffee and possibility. I dressed carefully in my new suit, pinned my hair up in a professional chignon, and applied makeup with more precision than usual. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the accommodating daughter, who'd spent years trying to earn approval, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in a boardroom. The Hayes and Associates offices occupied the top 2 floors of a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, not far from my own apartment. I'd been there for family events over the years, but never as anything more than Richard and Catherine's daughter, someone to be introduced, and then politely ignored, while the adults discussed business. Today, I walked through the lobby like I owned the place, which, I reflected with dark amusement, I essentially did. The receptionist, a young woman named Jessica whom I'd met at Christmas parties, looked surprised to see me. Victoria, how nice to see you. Are you here for the board meeting? I am, I said simply, not bothering to explain my presence. She would understand soon enough. The conference room was on the 20th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River and the mountains beyond. It was designed to impress, with a massive mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs and original artwork on the walls. Eleanor had commissioned this space during the company's early expansion, and it still bore the elegant, understated style that had characterized all of her business decisions. I arrived 15 minutes early, wanting to be settled and composed when the others entered. The board consisted of 5 members, in addition to the Hayes family representation. 3 longtime family friends who'd been loyal to Eleanor, and 2 industry professionals she'd recruited to provide strategic guidance. Dr. William Harrison, Eleanor's longtime friend and former business partner, was the first to arrive. His face lit up when he saw me, and he crossed the room to give me a warm hug. Victoria, my dear, what a wonderful surprise. I didn't know you'd be joining us today. There have been some recent changes, I said carefully. Benjamin Cross will be explaining everything shortly. The other board members filed in over the next few minutes, all expressing similar surprise and pleasure at my presence. These were people who'd known me since childhood, who'd watched me grow up and consistently expressed approval of my independence and career choices. Unlike my parents, they'd never seemed threatened by my success or my refusal to follow traditional expectations. Richard entered the room at exactly 9 o'clock, followed by Catherine and Marcus. All three were dressed for success, carrying leather portfolios, and projecting the kind of confident authority that came from years of running their own show. Richard's face went through a series of expressions when he saw me: surprise, confusion, and then something approaching irritation. "Victoria, what are you doing here? This is a board meeting, not a family gathering." "Actually," Benjamin Cross said, entering the room behind them, "Victoria has every right to be here. In fact, she has more right to be here than anyone else in this room." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Richard's confident smile faltered slightly, and I saw Catherine and Marcus exchange worried glances. "What do you mean by that, Ben?" Richard asked, his voice carefully controlled. Benjamin Cross took his seat at the table and opened his briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents I recognized from our meetings this week. "I mean that as of Monday afternoon, Victoria Hayes became the majority shareholder of Hayes & Associates, inheriting 60% of the company through the Eleanor Hayes Memorial Trust." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched my parents' faces as they processed this information, saw the exact moment when the implications hit them. Richard's face went pale, then flushed red. Catherine's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. "That's impossible," Richard said finally. "Mother left the company to the family." "To me and Catherine." "Your mother left operational control to you," Benjamin corrected. "She never transferred ownership. The controlling interest has always belonged to the trust, and the trust has now transferred that ownership to Victoria." Richard turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life I saw something approaching fear in his eyes. "Victoria, surely you're not going to interfere with the company's operations. You don't know anything about investment management or client relations." I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settling around me like a mantle. "Actually, I know quite a lot about strategic planning, data analysis, and organizational management. I also know quite a lot about what this company has become under your leadership." I opened my own portfolio and pulled out the financial reports and industry analyses I'd compiled over the past 2 days. Client retention is down 30%. Investment returns are consistently below industry averages. The company's reputation in professional circles is deteriorating rapidly. You've been covering up systematic failures with creative accounting and increasingly desperate marketing efforts. Catherine found her voice first. "Victoria, honey, you don't understand the complexities of our business. There have been market challenges, economic factors beyond our control." "Don't," I said quietly, and something in my tone made her stop mid-sentence. "Don't try to manipulate me the way you did when you called my boss to tell him I was mentally unstable." The revelation hung in the air like a bomb. The other board members turned to stare at my parents, and I saw Dr. Harrison's face darken with disapproval. "You did what?" he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "We were concerned about Victoria's mental state," Richard said quickly. "She'd been acting erratically since Mother's death, making poor decisions, cutting off communication with family members. We thought her employer should be aware that she might need professional help." "You tried to have her fired," Dr. Harrison said flatly. "You called her boss to plant seeds of doubt about her mental stability and professional competence." "That's not what we," Catherine began, but I cut her off. "That's exactly what you did." And it backfired spectacularly. I looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. My grandmother knew this day would come. She knew that eventually, my parents would cross a line that revealed their true nature. She prepared for it by ensuring I'd have the power to respond appropriately. I pulled out Eleanor's letter and read it aloud, watching my parents' faces as their mother's words condemned their behavior from beyond the grave. By the time I finished, Catherine was crying quietly and Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years. "The question now," I continued, "is what to do next. I have several options. I can sell my shares and walk away from all of this. I can maintain silent ownership while allowing current management to continue. Or I can take active control of the company and implement the changes necessary to restore its reputation and profitability. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice shaky with barely controlled anger. You can't just waltz in here and destroy everything we've built. This company is our livelihood, our legacy. This company is Eleanor Hayes's legacy, I said firmly. And you've been destroying it through incompetence and poor judgment. The question is whether you're willing to accept new leadership and work toward rebuilding what you've damaged, or whether you'd prefer to find other employment. The room fell silent again. I could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic 20 floors below, the ticking of the antique clock on the credenza. Everything Eleanor had built, everything she'd worked for, hung in the balance of this moment. Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. Victoria, speaking for the board, I think we'd all like to hear your vision for the company's future. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my grandmother's trust settling on my shoulders. I want to restore Hayes & Associates to the standard Eleanor established, ethical practices, superior client service, and investment strategies that prioritize long-term stability over short-term gains. That will require new leadership, new systems, and a complete cultural overhaul. I looked directly at my parents as I continued. I'm prepared to retain current staff who demonstrate commitment to these principles and competence in their roles. I'm also prepared to make immediate changes where necessary to protect the company's future. Richard's voice was barely controlled when he spoke. And what role do you see for your family in this new vision? That depends entirely on your willingness to accept change and your ability to contribute positively to the company's recovery. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. But let me be absolutely clear. The days of using family connections to compensate for professional incompetence are over. The meeting continued for another hour, but the real business was finished. The board unanimously approved my assumption of controlling interest and requested a detailed strategic plan within 30 days. My parents sat in stunned silence as their authority evaporated around them, 20 years of assumed control stripped away in a single morning. As the other board members filed out, offering congratulations and support, my parents remained seated at the conference table. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the reality of their new circumstances. Victoria, Catherine said finally, her voice thick with tears. Please don't let this destroy our family. I looked at her for a long moment, feeling something between pity and profound sadness. I'm not the one who tried to destroy anything. I'm the one who's going to fix what you broke. I gathered my papers and walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and for future reference, if you have concerns about my professional competence or mental health, you can address them to me directly. I am, after all, your boss now. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt like descending from one world into another. 20 floors above, I just claimed my inheritance and transformed from victim to victor in the span of 2 hours. The city spread out before me through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, full of possibilities I'd never imagined. I walked out into the crisp October air feeling fundamentally changed, carrying the weight of my grandmother's trust, and the power to reshape not just my own future but the futures of everyone who'd underestimated me. The real work was just beginning, but for the first time in my life I felt truly ready for the challenge. Walking out of that boardroom felt like stepping into an entirely new existence. The familiar streets of downtown Portland looked different somehow, as if I was seeing them through the eyes of someone I'd never been before. The weight of responsibility settled across my shoulders like a perfectly tailored coat, heavy but comfortable, something I'd been unknowingly preparing to wear my entire life. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the elevator ride down, but I'd ignored it, needing these first few minutes of clarity before dealing with the inevitable fallout. Now, standing on the sidewalk outside the Hayes & Associates building, I finally glanced at the screen. 15 missed calls from Richard, 8 from Catherine, 12 text messages from Marcus, and 1 simple note from Lily. How did it go? Call me when you can. I deleted all the messages from my family without reading them and called Lily instead. Victoria? Her voice was tight with anticipation. Please tell me you survived whatever just happened. I more than survived, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I won, completely and utterly. I'm leaving work right now. Meet me at Blue Moon in 20 minutes and tell me everything. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 11 in the morning. Just a few students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. I ordered my usual lavender latte and found a corner table where we could talk without being overheard. The normalcy of the routine felt surreal after the morning's events. Lily arrived breathless, her coat still buttoned and her cheeks flushed from hurrying across downtown. She slid into the seat across from me and leaned forward immediately. Okay, start talking. What happened? I walked her through the entire board meeting, watching her expression shift from amazement to satisfaction to something approaching awe. When I got to the part about reading Eleanor's letter aloud, Lily actually laughed out loud. Your grandmother was a strategic genius, she said, shaking her head in admiration. She basically handed you a loaded weapon and perfect timing to use it. How did your parents react when they realized what had happened? Like their world had just ended. Which, in a way, it had. I stirred my latte thoughtfully. Richard looked like he'd been physically struck. Catherine started crying. Marcus just sat there in shock, probably calculating how much money he was about to lose. And now what? You're actually going to run an investment firm? The question I'd been avoiding since walking out of that conference room hung between us. Taking control in the heat of the moment had felt natural, necessary, right. But now, in the calm aftermath, the magnitude of what I'd committed to was starting to sink in. I think I am, I said slowly. I know it sounds crazy. 6 months ago, I was a software engineer with no business experience beyond my MBA coursework. But Lily, you should see what they've done to that company. It's dying. Eleanor spent decades building something meaningful, and they've been slowly destroying it through incompetence and arrogance. What's your first move? I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app where I'd been jotting down ideas during the meeting. I need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with. Full financial audit, client satisfaction survey, employee interviews, competitive analysis. I can't make strategic decisions without real data. That sounds very much like how you approach debugging code, Lily observed. Identify the problem systematically before trying to fix anything. Exactly. And just like debugging, I suspect most of the issues will trace back to a few fundamental flaws in the system. We talked for another hour, with Lily helping me think through the logistics of transitioning from software development to corporate leadership. Her analytical mind was perfect for breaking down the challenge into manageable components, and by the time we finished our coffee, I had the outline of a 30-day plan. The first call I made from my apartment was to Benjamin Cross. Victoria, he answered on the first ring. I've been hoping to hear from you. How are you feeling after this morning's events? Overwhelmed but determined, I admitted. I need to ask you something important. How much autonomy do I actually have? Can I hire outside consultants, bring in new management, restructure the entire operation if necessary? You have complete autonomy, he confirmed. The trust gives you all the authority Eleanor would have had as majority owner. You can make any changes you deem necessary for the company's success. Good. I'm going to need it. My second call was to Patricia Morrison, the private investigator who'd briefed me on the company's problems. Patricia, I need a much deeper dive into Hayes & Associates. Full background checks on all senior staff, detailed financial analysis going back 5 years, and a comprehensive assessment of their client relationships. Are you planning a hostile takeover? She asked, amusement evident in her voice. I'm planning a rescue mission. Within 2 hours, I had appointments scheduled with a business consultant who specialized in corporate turnarounds, a headhunter who could help me identify potential new management candidates, and an accountant who could provide independent financial analysis. I was approaching this like any complex project, with thorough research, clear objectives, and systematic execution. The hardest call was to Daniel Morrison at Northpoint Technologies. Victoria, how are you feeling? Are you ready to come back to work on Monday? I took a deep breath. Daniel, I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Victoria, if this is about what happened earlier this week with your parents, it's not about that exactly. It's about an opportunity I can't pass up. I've just inherited controlling interest in a company that needs significant restructuring, and I've decided to take on that challenge. You're leaving software development to run a business? I'm applying everything I've learned about systems analysis and problem solving to a different kind of system. But yes, essentially. Daniel was quiet for another moment. Well, I can't say I'm not disappointed to lose you, but I have to admit I'm impressed. Your parents clearly underestimated who they were dealing with. They did indeed. Will you stay on as a consultant if we need you for any of the projects you've been working on? Of course. I want to make sure everything transitions smoothly. After I hung up, I sat in my living room staring out at the Portland skyline, trying to process the fact that I'd just quit my job to run a company I'd inherited that morning. 6 hours ago, I'd been a software engineer. Now I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar investment firm, with a failing business model and a hostile management team. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and after a moment's hesitation, I answered. Victoria. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. We need to talk. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Can you come to the house? Your mother is very upset, and I think we need to discuss this situation like adults. I almost laughed at the irony. Like adults? Richard, you called my boss to tell him I was mentally unstable. That's not how adults handle disagreements. That was a mistake, he admitted, the words clearly difficult for him. We were concerned about you and we handled it poorly. But Victoria, you can't seriously be considering taking over the company. You don't have the experience, the relationships, the industry knowledge. I have something you don't have, I interrupted. The ability to recognize when something isn't working and the willingness to fix it. The company is fine. We've had some challenging quarters, but that's normal in this industry. The company is failing, Richard. Client retention is down 30%. Your investment returns are consistently below market averages. You've lost 3 major accounts in the past year alone. I paused, letting that sink in. I've done my research. Another long silence. Will you at least come to dinner Sunday? Your mother. She's taking this very hard. She feels like she's losing her daughter. She's not losing her daughter. She's losing her ability to control her daughter. There's a difference. Sunday dinner, please. We're still family, Victoria. I considered hanging up, but something in his tone gave me pause. Not the old manipulative edge I was used to, but something that sounded almost like genuine distress. I'll think about it, I said finally, and ended the call before he could respond. The rest of Friday passed in a blur of phone calls and meetings. I drove to Hayes & Associates to meet with the office manager, Janet Stevens, a woman in her 50s who'd been with the company for over 15 years. She greeted me with warmth and obvious relief. Ms. Hayes, I can't tell you how glad I am that you're here. I've been watching this company struggle for years, and I've been hoping someone would step in to turn things around. We spent 2 hours going through the operational details, staff structure, client management systems, financial reporting processes, technology infrastructure. What I found was a company that had been coasting on reputation and personal relationships while falling behind on every metric that actually mattered. The staff morale is terrible, Janet confided as we wrapped up. People are afraid to suggest improvements because any criticism of current methods is taken as a personal attack on the Hayes family. We've lost some really talented people who got frustrated with the resistance to change. That's going to change immediately, I assured her. I want to schedule individual meetings with every employee next week. I need to understand what's working, what isn't, and what ideas people have for improvement. Really? The hope in her voice was unmistakable. That would be wonderful. We have some brilliant people here who've been dying to contribute more meaningfully. Saturday morning, I woke up in my apartment feeling the weight of ownership in a way I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about inheriting money or property. It was about being responsible for the livelihoods of 24 employees, the financial security of hundreds of clients, and the preservation of my grandmother's legacy. I made coffee and opened my laptop, diving into the financial reports Patricia Morrison had compiled. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd initially understood. The company was hemorrhaging money, propped up primarily by a few large, long-standing client relationships that were themselves showing signs of strain. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Victoria, this is Dr. Harrison from the board. Would you be available for lunch today? I'd like to discuss the situation privately if you're willing. An hour later, I found myself sitting across from Eleanor's oldest friend and business partner at a quiet restaurant in the Pearl District. Dr. Harrison was a distinguished man in his 70s, with silver hair and the kind of thoughtful demeanor that suggested decades of careful listening and wise counsel. "I want you to know," he began after we'd ordered, "that I couldn't be more pleased with yesterday's developments. Eleanor would be so proud of how you handled yourself in that boardroom." "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. I've been watching this company deteriorate for years, and I've been frustrated by my inability to do anything about it. As a minority board member, I could voice concerns, but I couldn't force changes." He paused, studying my face. "Now, with you in control, we finally have the opportunity to restore what Eleanor built. Dr. Harrison, can I ask you something honestly? Do you think I'm crazy for taking this on? I have business education but no practical experience running a company." He smiled, the expression transforming his distinguished features. Eleanor started this company when she was 32 years old, with no business experience beyond a basic economics degree. What she had was intelligence, determination, and an absolute commitment to doing things the right way. I see those same qualities in you. But the challenges we're facing now are significant but not insurmountable. The fundamentals of this business haven't changed. People with money need wise guidance on how to invest it. If you can provide superior service and consistent returns, clients will come back. The problem has been that your parents focused on maintaining appearances rather than delivering results. We talked for 2 hours about the company's history, its current challenges, and the potential paths forward. Dr. Harrison had a wealth of institutional knowledge and industry connections that would be invaluable during the transition period. "There's something else you should know," he said as we finished our coffee. "Your parents have been pressuring the other board members to challenge your authority. They're claiming that Eleanor's will was the result of undue influence and diminished capacity." I felt a chill run down my spine. Can they do that? They can try, but they won't succeed. Benjamin Cross is one of the most respected estate attorneys in Oregon, and he documented Eleanor's mental competence thoroughly. More importantly, the other board members all witnessed her lucidity and strategic thinking right up until her death. Any challenge would be frivolous and expensive. But they might try anyway. They might. Desperate people make desperate choices. He reached across the table and patted my hand gently. "Don't let them intimidate you, Victoria. You have more support than you realize." That evening, I sat in my living room surrounded by financial reports, strategic planning documents, and industry research. The scope of the challenge was becoming clearer, but so was the path forward. Hayes & Associates needed new leadership, new systems, and a complete cultural transformation. It would take months of intensive work, but it was achievable. My phone rang, displaying Catherine's name. I hesitated, then answered. "Victoria, sweetheart, please come to dinner tomorrow. I know we have things to work through, but we're family. We should be able to find a way forward together. Catherine, I'm not opposed to maintaining a relationship with you and Richard, but things have changed permanently. I'm not the accommodating daughter who accepts whatever role you assign her anymore." "I know that. We know that. But surely we can find a way to work together. Richard has 20 years of experience in this industry, and I've built relationships with many of our most important clients. We could be assets to you if you'll let us." I considered this. The rational part of my brain acknowledged that retaining their knowledge and relationships might be strategically valuable during the transition period. The emotional part of me wanted to fire them immediately and never see them again. If I come to dinner, it's not a negotiation or a reconciliation. It's a business meeting between a CEO and employees who may or may not have a future with the company. Are you prepared for that conversation? Yes, she said quickly. Yes, we are. Fine, I'll be there at 6. Sunday afternoon, I drove through the winding roads of West Hills to the house where I'd grown up. The familiar route felt like traveling backward through time. Past the country club where I'd taken tennis lessons, the private school where I'd been a dutiful student, The neighborhoods where my parents' friends lived in careful isolation from anything that might challenge their worldview. The Hayes family home was a sprawling Tudor Revival mansion set on 3 acres of meticulously maintained grounds. Richard had inherited it from his parents, and Catherine had spent decades decorating and redecorating it to reflect their evolving social status. Every room was designed to impress visitors and reinforce the family's position in Portland's old money hierarchy. I parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, remembering countless Sunday dinners where I'd felt like an outsider at my own family's table. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I was coming as their equal. More than their equal, actually. Catherine answered the door wearing a navy dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and her makeup flawless, despite the obvious strain around her eyes. She looked every inch the wealthy society wife, but something fundamental had shifted in her demeanor. The unconscious authority she'd always projected had been replaced by something almost deferential. "Victoria, thank you for coming. You look wonderful." I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A tailored black dress that was elegant but businesslike, paired with pearls that had been Eleanor's. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in their world but refused to be diminished by it. Richard stood as I entered the formal dining room, and I was struck by how much older he looked than he had just 2 days ago. The confident businessman who dismissed my concerns on Friday had been replaced by someone who seemed uncertain of his own position. "Victoria," he said, extending his hand formally. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." The dining room was set with Catherine's best china and crystal, the table decorated with an elaborate floral arrangement that probably cost more than some families spent on groceries in a month. It was all very elegant and very calculated, designed to remind me of the world I'd be leaving behind if I chose to antagonize them. Marcus was noticeably absent, and when I asked about him, Richard's expression darkened slightly. Marcus felt that his presence might make the conversation more difficult. "He's processing the situation." "He's furious," Catherine added, shooting Richard a sharp look. "He's spent his entire adult life preparing to inherit the family business, and now he's going to have to earn his position like everyone else." I finished. How novel. Dinner conversation was stilted and artificial, filled with the kind of careful pleasantries that had characterized our family interactions for years. But underneath the surface politeness, I could feel the tension building toward the real conversation we were all avoiding. Finally, as Catherine served coffee and dessert, Richard cleared his throat and looked directly at me. "Victoria, I want to apologize for what we did this week. Calling your boss was inappropriate and manipulative, and it backfired in ways we never intended." "You mean it backfired because Eleanor left me controlling interest in the company," I said bluntly. "If she hadn't, would you be apologizing now?" The question hung in the air unanswered, which was answer enough. "What's done is done," Catherine said quickly. "The question now is how we move forward. We all want what's best for the company, don't we?" "Do we?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been prioritizing your own comfort and status over the company's actual performance for years." Richard's face flushed red, but his voice remained controlled. "We've faced some challenges, yes, but we've also maintained client relationships and preserved the company's reputation. You've maintained the illusion of success while the actual business deteriorated. Client retention is down, returns are below market average, and your reputation in professional circles is declining rapidly." I pulled out my phone and opened the research Patricia had compiled. "Would you like me to go through the specifics?" "That won't be necessary," Catherine said hastily. "We acknowledge that there have been some difficulties, but surely you can see the value in retaining our experience and relationships during any transition period." I studied their faces, seeing the careful hope they were trying to hide. They needed this job more than they were willing to admit, and they were finally beginning to understand that their daughter held all the cards. "Here's what I'm prepared to offer," I said, setting down my coffee cup. "You can remain as consultants during a 6-month transition period. You'll help me understand client relationships and industry connections, but you'll have no authority over strategic decisions or day-to-day operations. Your compensation will be reduced to reflect your new roles, and your continued employment will depend entirely on your willingness to support the changes I implement." "Consultants?" Richard's voice cracked slightly on the word. Consultants. With no guarantees beyond the initial 6 months. Catherine reached for Richard's hand across the table, and I saw her squeeze it tightly. What about Marcus? Marcus can apply for any position he's qualified for, just like any other candidate. If he has the skills and attitude we need, he'll be considered on his merits. Victoria, Richard said slowly, you're asking us to give up everything we've built. I'm asking you to accept responsibility for what you've done to what Eleanor built. The company is failing under your leadership. That's not my opinion. It's documented fact. I'm offering you an opportunity to be part of the solution, instead of continuing to be part of the problem. The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. I could see them processing the reality of their situation, weighing their options and coming to terms with their new powerlessness. And if we refuse? Catherine asked quietly. Then you'll be terminated immediately, and you'll have to explain to your friends at the country club why Eleanor's granddaughter fired you from the family business. Richard laughed, a short, bitter sound. You've certainly learned to play hardball quickly. I learned from watching you. The difference is that I'm playing with facts and performance metrics instead of manipulation and emotional blackmail. Catherine was crying quietly now, dabbing at her eyes with her linen napkin. I don't understand how we got here. We love you, Victoria. We've always wanted what was best for you. What you wanted was control. There's a difference. I stood up, reaching for my purse. I need an answer by Wednesday morning. Take the consultant positions or find other employment. Those are your only options. As I walked toward the door, Richard called after me. Victoria, wait. There's something else we need to discuss. I turned back, seeing something in his expression that made me wary. We've retained an attorney to challenge the will. We believe Eleanor was unduly influenced in her final months, possibly suffering from diminished capacity that affected her judgment. The threat hung between us like a loaded weapon. They were willing to destroy Eleanor's reputation to regain control of her company. Go ahead, I said calmly. Challenge it. But understand that you'll be publicly accusing your own mother of mental incapacity, and you'll lose. Benjamin Cross documented her competence thoroughly, and the entire board witnessed her sharp thinking right up until her death. Are you willing to bet everything on that? Richard asked. I smiled, feeling Eleanor's strength flowing through me. I'm willing to bet everything on the truth. The question is whether you're prepared to bet your reputation, and what's left of your credibility on a lie. I walked out of that house knowing that the real battle was just beginning. My parents had shown me exactly who they were and exactly how far they were willing to go to maintain control. But they'd also revealed their fundamental weakness. They were fighting to preserve a failing status quo while I was building something better. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to process the evening's revelations. They were going to challenge the will, which meant months of legal battles and public scrutiny. They were going to force me to prove that I deserved what Eleanor had given me, that I was capable of preserving and rebuilding her legacy. I thought about my grandmother, about the woman who'd built an empire through intelligence and determination, and absolute refusal to let others define her worth. She'd faced down skeptics and challengers for decades, and she'd trusted me to do the same. As I pulled into my parking garage, my phone buzzed with a text from Lily. How did dinner go? Do you need wine and emergency debriefing? I typed back, rain check on the wine. I have work to do. Because I did. The legal challenge was coming, the business transformation was just beginning, and I had 6 months to prove that Eleanor Hayes had been right to trust her granddaughter with everything she'd built. The real test was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with the kind of persistent Portland drizzle that made everything look gray and uncertain. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of a crisp white blouse beneath a charcoal blazer, preparing for my first official day as the majority owner of Hayes & Associates. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the accommodating daughter, who had sat through countless family dinners, accepting criticism and diminishment as the price of belonging. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt different this time. I wasn't visiting my parents' workplace, I was arriving at my company. The subtle shift in perspective changed everything about how I moved through the space, how I interacted with the staff, how I carried myself through the elegantly appointed offices that Eleanor had designed to project competence and trustworthiness. Janet Stevens was waiting for me with a steaming cup of coffee and a schedule that looked ambitious even by my standards. She'd arranged individual meetings with each department head, followed by a staff meeting at 2 o'clock, and ending with a video conference with the company's largest remaining client, who'd been threatening to take their business elsewhere. "Before we begin," Janet said, settling into the chair across from my new office desk, "there's something you should know. Word has gotten out about the ownership change, and people are cautiously optimistic. There's been more energy in this office over the past 3 days than I've seen in months. And my parents? They arrived an hour ago and have been in Richard's office with the door closed. There was quite a bit of raised voices earlier, but it's been quiet for the past 30 minutes. I nodded, unsurprised by this development. They were likely strategizing their next moves, coordinating their legal challenge, while trying to figure out how to maintain their positions in the company hierarchy. The fact that they'd shown up at all suggested they were at least considering my consultant offer, though I suspected they were looking for ways to undermine it from within. My first meeting was with David Park, the head of client services, and one of the few senior staff members who'd been hired based on merit rather than personal connections. He was a serious man in his early 40s, with the kind of detailed knowledge about client needs and market trends that had been consistently ignored by my parents' management style. "Ms. Hayes," he began, settling into his chair with obvious relief. "I can't tell you how refreshing it is to finally have someone in charge who wants to hear about actual performance data." "Show me everything," I said, opening my laptop and preparing to take notes. "I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with." For the next hour, David walked me through a comprehensive analysis of the company's client relationships, retention rates, and competitive positioning that painted an even more troubling picture than I'd anticipated. We weren't just underperforming, we were actively losing ground to smaller, more agile firms who were providing better service and achieving superior returns. "The frustrating thing," David explained, pulling up a spreadsheet that showed client feedback scores, "is that we have the expertise and resources to compete effectively. Our research team is excellent, our analytical capabilities are strong, and our client service infrastructure is solid. The problem has been strategic decision-making at the executive level." "Give me specifics." "We've been chasing short-term gains instead of building sustainable growth strategies. We've prioritized high-commission products over investments that actually serve our clients' long-term interests. And we've been so focused on maintaining existing relationships that we've completely neglected business development with younger, more dynamic companies." David pulled up another chart showing the age demographics of our client base, and the trend was stark. Nearly 70% of our clients were over 60, with very little new business coming from the growing tech sector that was driving Portland's economic expansion. "This is a demographic cliff," I observed, studying the numbers. "In 10 years, we'll have lost most of our client base to natural attrition." "Exactly. And the younger clients we have been able to attract are leaving for firms that offer more innovative investment strategies and better digital interfaces. We're still operating like it's 1995. I spent the rest of the morning meeting with other department heads, each painting variations of the same picture. Talented, frustrated employees who'd been constrained by outdated systems and risk-averse leadership. Technology infrastructure that was functional but far behind industry standards. Marketing and business development efforts that relied entirely on personal referrals and country club connections. The staff meeting at 2 o'clock was held in the main conference room, with all 24 employees gathered around the polished mahogany table. I could feel the mixture of curiosity, hope, and anxiety radiating from the group as I stood to address them for the first time as their new leader. "I'm sure you've all heard by now that there have been some ownership changes at Hayes & Associates," I began, choosing my words carefully. "My grandmother, Eleanor Hayes, left me controlling interest in the company through the family trust. I'm here today not as Richard and Catherine's daughter, but as your new majority owner and CEO." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the ventilation system and the distant sound of traffic 20 floors below. I could see some employees exchanging glances, processing the implications of this announcement. "I know this is a significant change, and I know some of you may have concerns about my qualifications or intentions. Let me address those directly. I have an MBA in business strategy and 4 years of experience in systems analysis and organizational efficiency. More importantly, I've spent the past week studying this company's performance data, and I believe we have tremendous untapped potential. A hand raised tentatively from the middle of the table. Sarah Chen, one of the junior analysts who'd been with the company for 3 years, looked nervous but determined. Ms. Hayes, can you tell us what changes you're planning to implement? I'm glad you asked, Sarah. Over the next 30 days, I'll be conducting a comprehensive review of every aspect of our operations. I want to understand what's working, what isn't, and what opportunities we're missing. After that review, we'll develop a strategic plan focused on sustainable growth, improved client service, and technological modernization. Another hand went up, this time from Tom Wilson, a senior portfolio manager who'd been with the company for over a decade. What about current management? Will Richard and Catherine be staying on? I'd been expecting this question and had prepared my answer carefully. Richard and Catherine Hayes will be transitioning to consulting roles over the next 6 months. They'll continue to provide valuable industry knowledge and client relationship support, but strategic decision-making will be centralized under new leadership. The shift in energy around the table was immediate and palpable. I could see relief on several faces, excitement on others, and something approaching hope on nearly everyone. I want to be clear about something, I continued. This transition is about improving performance and serving our clients better. It's not about punishment or revenge. Every person in this room will be evaluated based on their contributions, their skills, and their commitment to excellence. Your relationship with previous management will have no bearing on your future with this company. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from technology upgrades to professional development opportunities to the company's long-term strategic vision. By the time the meeting ended, I could feel the beginnings of genuine enthusiasm building among the staff. As employees filed out of the conference room, Janet lingered behind with an expression of barely contained satisfaction. "That was masterfully handled," she said quietly. "You've just given these people something they haven't had in years, hope for meaningful change. Now I have to deliver on it." "You will. I can already see the difference in how people are carrying themselves, how they're talking about their work. It's remarkable what happens when talented people feel like their contributions actually matter." The afternoon client video conference was with Portland General Investment Group, a pension fund management company that represented nearly 15% of our total assets under management. Their CEO, Margaret Steinberg, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on demanding accountability and results from every service provider. "Ms. Hayes," she began without preamble once the video connection was established, "I'll be direct. We've been considering moving our account to Morrison Financial. Your company's performance over the past 18 months has been disappointing, and we need to see significant improvement, or we'll be terminating our relationship." I'd anticipated this conversation and had spent considerable time preparing for it. "Margaret, I appreciate your directness, and I want to be equally direct in response. You're absolutely right to be concerned about our recent performance. The previous management approach was not serving your interests or ours effectively. And what makes you think things will change now?" "Because I'm implementing a complete strategic overhaul focused on sustainable returns rather than short-term commission generation. Because I'm investing in technology upgrades that will improve our analytical capabilities and reporting transparency. And because I'm personally committed to rebuilding this company's reputation for excellence." Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying me through the video screen. "You're very young to be taking on this kind of responsibility. I'm old enough to recognize when a system isn't working and young enough to have the energy to fix it. My grandmother built this company on the principle that superior service and consistent results speak louder than age or connections. I intend to return to those founding principles." The conversation continued for another 45 minutes, with Margaret grilling me on everything from investment philosophy to risk management protocols to technology infrastructure. By the end, she hadn't committed to staying, but she'd agreed to give us 90 days to demonstrate measurable improvement. "I hope you understand what you're taking on," she said as we wrapped up the call. Turning around a struggling firm while managing family dynamics and industry skepticism? It's not a challenge for the faint of heart. I understand completely, and I'm not faint of heart. After Margaret signed off, I sat in the conference room for several minutes, processing the weight of responsibility that seemed to grow heavier with each conversation. This wasn't just about proving my parents wrong or honoring Eleanor's legacy. It was about the livelihoods of 24 employees and the financial security of hundreds of clients who'd trusted us with their life savings. My phone buzzed with a text from Benjamin Cross. "Victoria, can you come to my office this evening? There have been some developments regarding the will challenge that we need to discuss." An hour later, I found myself back in the familiar comfort of Benjamin's law office, though the atmosphere felt considerably more tense than our previous meetings. He was waiting for me with a thick folder of legal documents and an expression that suggested the news wasn't entirely positive. "Your parents have formally filed their challenge to Eleanor's will," he began without preamble. "They're claiming that she lacked testamentary capacity during her final months, and that she was subject to undue influence from parties seeking to benefit from her altered mental state. Parties meaning me. Parties meaning you. They're arguing that your frequent visits to the hospital and your close relationship with Eleanor during her final weeks constitute evidence of manipulation and coercion." I felt a cold anger building in my chest. They're accusing me of manipulating a dying woman to steal their inheritance. That's essentially the claim, yes. They've also filed for an emergency injunction to freeze the trust assets pending resolution of the challenge, which would effectively prevent you from making any significant changes to the company's operations. The implications of this hit me immediately. If they succeeded in freezing the trust, I'd be a powerless figurehead while they continued to run the company into the ground. All the plans I'd made, all the improvements I'd promised, all the hope I'd just given to employees and clients, it could all be stripped away by legal maneuvering. How strong is their case? Benjamin opened the folder and pulled out several documents. Legally, it's weak. Eleanor's medical records show no evidence of cognitive decline. Her treating physicians will testify to her mental acuity right up until her death. The will was drafted 3 years ago, well before any health issues, and she confirmed her intentions multiple times with complete lucidity. But will contests can be expensive and time-consuming, even when they're ultimately unsuccessful. Your parents have retained Morrison, Kellner and Associates, one of the most aggressive litigation firms in the state. They're clearly prepared to drag this out as long as possible. I studied the legal papers, seeing my parents' signatures at the bottom of documents that essentially accused me of elder abuse and fraud. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were willing to destroy my reputation and dishonor their own mother's memory to regain control of her company. What are our options? We fight it aggressively and publicly. We demonstrate Eleanor's competence through medical testimony and witness statements. We show that the will reflects her genuine intentions and values. And we make it clear that this challenge is motivated by greed rather than legitimate concern. How long could this take? If they're determined to be obstructionist, potentially months. Maybe longer if they appeal adverse rulings. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of this new reality settling around me. Just when I'd begun to feel confident about the path forward, my parents had found a way to drag me back into legal warfare that could consume months of time and energy I needed to focus on rebuilding the company. There is one other consideration, Benjamin added carefully. The public nature of this challenge could damage the company's reputation and client relationships. Potential clients might be hesitant to work with a firm embroiled in family litigation, so they're trying to destroy the company's value if they can't control it directly. That appears to be the strategy, yes. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline as the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Somewhere out there, my parents were probably celebrating their legal maneuvering, confident that they'd found a way to force me back into compliance. They'd underestimated me before, and they were underestimating me again. "Benjamin, I want you to do something for me. I want you to schedule a press conference for tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to address this challenge publicly and directly." He looked surprised. "Victoria, that's not typically how these matters are handled. Usually we'd recommend letting the legal process play out quietly. Usually the heir isn't trying to run a business while fighting off frivolous litigation. My parents are betting that I'll cave under pressure rather than endure a public battle." "They're wrong. What do you plan to say?" I turned back from the window, feeling Eleanor's strength flowing through me once again. "I plan to tell the truth. About Eleanor's competence, about my qualifications, about the company's real problems, and about my parents' motivations for this challenge. Let them try to defend their actions in the court of public opinion." Benjamin was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. It's a risky strategy. Once you make this public, there's no going back to quiet resolution. There was never going to be a quiet resolution. They've made that clear. So we're going to fight this battle on my terms, not theirs. As I drove home that evening, my phone rang constantly with calls from reporters who'd already gotten word of the will challenge. News traveled fast in Portland's business community, and the story of a family feud over a multi-million-dollar investment firm was exactly the kind of drama that sold newspapers and generated website clicks. I ignored all the calls, knowing I'd have my opportunity to tell my side of the story tomorrow. Instead, I spent the evening preparing for the press conference, reviewing Eleanor's medical records, gathering testimony from employees about the company's recent struggles, and crafting a narrative that would frame this challenge as exactly what it was: a desperate attempt by failed managers to regain control they'd never deserved. Lily came over around 9 o'clock with Chinese takeout and moral support, finding me surrounded by legal documents and strategic notes. "You look like you're preparing for war," she observed, settling onto my couch with a container of lo mein. "I am preparing for war. My parents just declared it officially." I filled her in on the will challenge and my decision to go public with a press conference. Lily listened with the same analytical focus she brought to complex coding problems, asking clarifying questions and helping me think through potential consequences. "Are you sure you want to escalate this publicly?" she asked finally. "Once you make this a media story, everyone's going to have an opinion about your family's business. Everyone's going to have an opinion anyway. At least this way, I get to shape the narrative instead of letting them control it. And if the injunction succeeds, if they manage to freeze your authority while the challenge is pending?" I'd been thinking about this possibility all evening. "Then I'll run the most transparent public corporate turnaround in Portland's history. Every decision, every improvement, every success will be documented and shared. I'll make it impossible for them to claim I'm damaging the company or acting irresponsibly." Lily smiled, the expression mixing admiration with concern. "Your grandmother really did choose the right person to carry on her legacy. You're not just fighting for the company, you're fighting for the principle that competence should matter more than family politics." "Exactly. And tomorrow I'm going to make that principle very public." The next morning dawned clear and cold, one of those crisp October days that made Portland look like a postcard. I dressed in Eleanor's pearl earrings and a navy suit that projected authority without arrogance, preparing to face the media and defend not just my inheritance, but my grandmother's legacy and my own integrity. The press conference was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the downtown Marriott, giving me time for a final morning of preparation and a brief staff meeting to explain what was happening and why. The employees at Hayes & Associates deserved to understand the situation before they heard about it on the evening news. As I walked into the office that morning, I could feel the electricity of anticipation and uncertainty. Word of the legal challenge had spread through the building, and people were looking to me for reassurance about their jobs and the company's future. Janet met me at the elevator with coffee and an updated schedule that included 3 additional client calls from people who'd heard rumors and wanted clarification about the company's stability. "How are people handling the news?" I asked as we walked toward my office. "Better than you might expect. There's concern, obviously, but there's also a lot of anger about your parents trying to undermine the changes everyone's been hoping for. David Park actually said this morning that he'd rather see the company sold to outsiders than go back to the old management approach. That's quite a statement." "It is. And he's not the only one feeling that way." The morning client calls went better than I'd anticipated. Rather than expressing concern about stability, most clients seemed relieved that someone was finally taking aggressive action to address the company's problems. The fact that I was willing to fight publicly for the right to improve their service seemed to reassure rather than worry them. At 1:30, I stood in front of my office mirror, checking my appearance one final time before heading to face the media. The woman looking back at me bore no resemblance to the insecure daughter who'd sat through years of family dinners, accepting criticism and diminishment as the price of belonging. Eleanor had trusted me with everything she'd built because she'd seen something in me that I was only now beginning to recognize: the strength to fight for what was right, regardless of the personal cost. Today, I would honor that trust by telling the world exactly what kind of woman she'd been, and exactly what kind of people were trying to destroy her legacy. The battle was about to begin in earnest, and I was ready. The Marriott's conference room buzzed with anticipation as reporters, photographers, and local business journalists filled every available seat. I stood behind the podium, looking out at faces I recognized from Portland Business Journal, The Oregonian, and several financial news outlets. Camera lights blazed, creating an almost theatrical atmosphere that seemed fitting for what was about to unfold. Benjamin Cross sat in the front row, his steady presence, a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. Behind him, I spotted several familiar faces from the Portland business community, including Dr. Harrison and Margaret Steinberg from Portland General Investment Group. Word had spread quickly about the press conference, and people were clearly curious about what Eleanor Hayes' granddaughter had to say about the family drama that was already becoming front-page news. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room despite the butterflies performing aerial maneuvers in my stomach. "I'm here today to address the legal challenge that has been filed against my grandmother's will and to set the record straight about what's really happening at Hayes & Associates." I paused, scanning the room and making eye contact with several reporters who were already taking notes. 6 weeks ago, my grandmother Eleanor Hayes passed away after building one of Portland's most respected investment firms from nothing. She was a woman of extraordinary intelligence, integrity, and business acumen who remained sharp and decisive until the very end of her life. A hand shot up from the middle of the room. "Ms. Hayes, your parents are claiming that Eleanor lacked testamentary capacity when she updated her will. How do you respond to those allegations?" "I respond with facts," I said, pulling out a folder of medical records. "These are Eleanor's medical files from her final months, which show no evidence of cognitive decline or mental incapacity. Her treating physicians have confirmed that she was mentally acute throughout her illness. The will in question was actually drafted 3 years ago, well before any health issues, and she reconfirmed her intentions multiple times with complete lucidity." Another reporter spoke up. "What about the allegations of undue influence?" "The allegation of undue influence is particularly offensive to me personally," I replied, allowing some of my anger to show through my professional composure. "My grandmother and I had a close relationship based on mutual respect and shared values. She supported my education, my career, and my independence because she believed in empowering women to make their own choices. The idea that I manipulated or coerced her is not only false, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of who Eleanor Hayes was as a person." A woman from Portland Business Journal leaned forward. "Can you tell us about the current state of Hayes & Associates? Why do you think Eleanor chose to leave control to someone outside the current management structure?" This was the question I'd been hoping for, the opportunity to redirect the conversation from family drama to business reality. Eleanor left me controlling interest because she was concerned about the company's direction under current management. Over the past 3 years, Hayes & Associates has lost 30% of its client base, consistently underperformed market benchmarks, and fallen behind competitors in every meaningful metric. I pulled out the performance charts David Park had prepared, holding them up for the cameras. These numbers tell a story of systematic mismanagement and strategic failure. Eleanor built this company on principles of excellence and client service. Under my parents' leadership, it has become exactly the kind of underperforming, relationship-dependent firm that gives our industry a bad reputation. "What changes do you plan to implement?" asked a reporter from the Financial Newswire. "Complete modernization of our technology infrastructure, implementation of transparent performance metrics, strategic focus on sustainable long-term returns rather than high-commission products, and aggressive business development in growth sectors that have been ignored by previous management." I was gaining confidence as I spoke, feeling the clarity of my vision solidifying with each word. "We're also going to rebuild our reputation by demonstrating actual results rather than relying on social connections and family history." A man in the back row raised his hand. "Ms. Hayes, this is clearly a bitter family dispute. Shouldn't these matters be resolved privately rather than aired in public?" "Under normal circumstances, I would agree," I replied. But my parents have chosen to challenge Eleanor's will with frivolous claims that attack both her mental capacity and my integrity. They've filed for an emergency injunction that would prevent me from implementing the improvements our clients desperately need. When someone tries to destroy your reputation publicly, you have the right to defend yourself publicly. What would you say to critics who argue that you lack the experience to run a major investment firm? I'd anticipated this question and had my answer ready. I'd say that fresh perspective and analytical skills are exactly what this industry needs. I have an MBA in business strategy, 4 years of experience in systems analysis and organizational efficiency, and most importantly, I have no investment in maintaining failed strategies just because they've always been done that way. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from my specific business plans to the timeline for the legal challenge to my thoughts on family businesses in general. By the time I wrapped up, I felt confident that I'd accomplished my primary objective, framing this dispute as a conflict between competence and entitlement rather than a simple family feud. As reporters filed out, several people approached me directly. Margaret Steinberg was the first, extending her hand with an expression of grudging respect. "That was impressively handled," she said. "You've given us reason to believe you might actually be serious about turning things around." Dr. Harrison was next, his weathered face creased with what looked like pride. "Eleanor would have been so proud of how you handled yourself up there. You showed exactly the kind of backbone she always hoped you'd develop." But the most surprising approach came from David Park, who'd apparently watched the press conference online from the office. "Victoria," he said, slightly out of breath from hurrying over, "I just wanted you to know that the entire staff is behind you. We've been waiting years for someone to publicly acknowledge what we've all known about the company's problems." That evening, I watched the news coverage from my apartment, surrounded by Chinese takeout containers and legal documents. The story led both the local business news and the general interest segments, with most outlets framing it exactly as I'd hoped, as a young businesswoman fighting to save her grandmother's legacy from family members who'd mismanaged it. The phone rang constantly, with interview requests, strategic partnership inquiries, and messages of support from people I barely knew. But the most meaningful call came from Janet Stevens at the office. "Victoria, I just wanted you to know that we had 3 new client inquiries this afternoon," she reported, excitement evident in her voice. "All from people who saw the press conference and were impressed by your vision for the company." "Seriously? Seriously." One of them specifically said they'd been looking for an investment firm with young leadership and transparent practices. "Your willingness to fight publicly for your principles actually attracted them rather than scaring them away." After Janet hung up, I sat in my living room processing the surreal nature of the day. 24 hours ago, I'd been dealing with a secret legal challenge that threatened to destroy everything I'd worked toward. Now, I was the subject of front-page business news, and potential clients were calling because they liked what they'd seen. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Saw you on the news. Impressive performance." "This isn't over. R." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Richard could send all the threatening texts he wanted. I'd just demonstrated that I was prepared to fight this battle on the most public stage possible. 3 days later, Benjamin Cross called with news that would reshape everything once again. "Victoria, you need to get down to my office immediately. There's been a development with the legal challenge that changes our entire situation." I found him waiting with a stack of new documents and an expression that mixed satisfaction with disbelief. "Your parents have withdrawn their legal challenge," he announced without preamble. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "They what?" "Withdrew it. Completely. Filed a motion this morning dismissing all claims and acknowledging the validity of Eleanor's will." "Why would they do that? What happened?" Benjamin smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious features. "It appears that your press conference had some unintended consequences. The litigation firm representing your parents received a call yesterday from Morrison, Kellner & Associates, largest client. A client who also happens to be a major investor in several Portland-area businesses." He pulled out a letter and handed it to me. This client was not pleased to learn that their law firm was representing people who were publicly attacking a respected businesswoman's mental capacity and attempting to prevent necessary corporate reforms. They made it clear that continued representation of your parents would result in immediate termination of a very lucrative relationship. So they dropped my parents as clients? More than that. Morrison, Kellner informed your parents that they could no longer provide representation and strongly advised them to abandon the challenge before it damaged their own reputations further. I read through the withdrawal documents, seeing Richard and Catherine's signatures at the bottom of papers that essentially admitted their challenge had been without merit. The calculated cruelty they'd shown in filing the case was now matched by the humiliating nature of their retreat. There's more, Benjamin continued. I received a call from your father this morning. He and Catherine want to meet with you to discuss their future with the company. After everything they've put me through, they want to negotiate? Apparently, the public nature of this dispute has made their position in Portland's business community untenable. Several country club memberships have been quietly suspended, social invitations have dried up, and Catherine's volunteer board positions are being re-evaluated. They're discovering that attacking Eleanor's reputation carries a higher social cost than they anticipated. That afternoon, I sat across from my parents in Benjamin Cross's conference room, watching them struggle with a reality they'd never imagined facing. Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week, his usually perfect posture sagging with defeat. Catherine's designer outfit couldn't hide the obvious strain around her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she reached for her water glass. Victoria, Richard began, his voice carefully controlled, we want to apologize for the legal challenge. It was a mistake born out of grief and confusion, and we're withdrawing it completely. You're withdrawing it because your lawyers dropped you and your social circle is shunning you, I replied calmly, not because you suddenly realized it was wrong. The motivation doesn't matter, Catherine interjected quickly. What matters is that we're prepared to accept the new reality and work within the structure you've established. I studied their faces, seeing desperation poorly disguised as reasonableness. They weren't here because they'd experienced some moral awakening. They were here because they'd finally encountered consequences they couldn't manipulate or avoid. What exactly are you proposing? We accept the consultant positions you offered, Richard said. 6-month terms, reduced authority, compensation adjusted to reflect our new roles. We'll support your strategic vision and help with client transition. And Marcus? Marcus has decided to pursue opportunities elsewhere, Catherine said quietly. He feels that working under his sister's authority would be uncomfortable for everyone involved. I nodded, unsurprised by this development. Marcus had always been the most entitled of the three, the one who'd most fully bought into the narrative that family status trumped competence. He was probably already applying to firms where his last name and country club connections might still carry weight. If I agree to this arrangement, I said carefully, there are conditions that are non-negotiable. We're listening, Richard replied. You will publicly support all strategic changes I implement. You will not second-guess my decisions or undermine my authority with staff or clients. You will treat me as your boss, not as your daughter who needs guidance. And if you violate any of these conditions, your termination will be immediate and final. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. I could see them processing the reality of their complete powerlessness, the absolute reversal of every dynamic that had defined our family relationships for decades. We agree, Catherine said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Excellent. Report to Janet Stevens tomorrow morning at 8. She'll explain your new responsibilities and workspace arrangements. 6 months later, I stood in the same conference room where I'd first claimed my inheritance, looking out at a completely transformed company. The quarterly board meeting had just concluded with reports that would have been unimaginable a year ago. Client retention up 40%, new business acquisitions exceeding targets, investment returns consistently above market benchmarks, and employee satisfaction scores at all-time highs. Dr. Harrison was the last to leave, pausing at the door to share an observation that made everything worthwhile. Eleanor would be so proud, he said simply. You didn't just save her company. You made it better than it ever was. The transformation hadn't been easy. The first few months had required 18-hour days, difficult personnel decisions, and complete overhaul of systems that had been failing for years. But with each improvement, with each success, The company had gained momentum that became self-sustaining. Richard and Catherine had completed their consultant contracts and transitioned to part-time advisory roles, their relationship with me evolving into something approaching professional respect. They would never be the parents I'd hoped for, but they'd learned to be competent employees, and sometimes that was enough. The technology upgrades David Park had recommended transformed our analytical capabilities and client communication systems. The strategic focus on sustainable growth attracted a new generation of clients who valued transparency and performance over social connections. The cultural changes that empowered employees to contribute meaningfully had unleashed creativity and innovation that had been suppressed for years. But the most important transformation had been my own. The insecure daughter who'd once sought approval from people who would never respect her had been replaced by a leader who understood that true authority came from competence, integrity, and the courage to make difficult decisions when they served the greater good. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. "Drinks to celebrate? You've officially been running that company longer than anyone thought you could survive." I typed back, "Rain check. I have 3 new client meetings this afternoon and a strategic planning session tonight." Because I did. The real work was never finished. There were always new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to improve and grow. But for the first time in my life, I was building something that was truly mine, something that honored both Eleanor's legacy and my own vision for what excellence could look like. Walking to my office window, I looked out at the Portland skyline, thinking about the woman who'd given me the tools to claim my place in this world. Eleanor had trusted me with everything she'd built, but more importantly, she'd trusted me to become the person I was capable of being. The girl who'd once sat through family dinners, accepting diminishment as the price of belonging, was gone forever. In her place stood someone who'd learned the most important lesson of all: that respect isn't something you earn by making yourself smaller. It's something you claim by becoming exactly who you're meant to be. The company that bore Eleanor's name was thriving. The employees were engaged and motivated, the clients were satisfied and loyal, and the woman she'd entrusted with it all had finally learned to trust herself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply becoming so successful that your detractors have no choice but to acknowledge what they tried to destroy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.